Hi, my name is Nancy. I'm a watercolor artist specializing in botanical subjects. Today I'm going to work with a very simple design with just 3 daisies and a few leaves. Now, I decided to go ahead with the leaves that have a lot of serrations, but I could have made them less so it would make it easier to go around with a paintbrush, but I'll stick with my design for today. Now, the colors that I will be using today are Holbein Sepia, Daniel Smith Phthalo Turquoise, Winsor & Newton Yellow Ochre, Core Transparent Pyrrole Orange, Winsor & Newton Viridian, Daniel Smith Lunar Black, Holbein Gamboge Nova, and Finetech Olympic Gold. I found a nice dark green mix with the turquoise and the sepia. I won't use that today, but I just thought that was a really nice dark green color. Now the brushes I'll be using are a Princeton 3/4 inch angular wash brush, Miller's Pseudo Sable No. 8 round, King Art 3/8 angular shader, Royal No. 6 filbert, Escoda Versatile No. 4 filbert, a Master's Touch No. 2 filbert from Hobby Lobby. Great for detail work. And a Rosemary & Co. Red Dot Series No. 0. Also, I'll be using an old toothbrush and a stencil, which I purchased from Cheap Joe's Art Stuff. Kind of a neat design. And lastly, I will pick one of these micron pens, probably the No. 8. Permanent black ink. I'll use Arches or Arche paper, 140-pound cold pressed, 8x10 on a watercolor block. And I've already transferred the design. If you wanted to see how I transferred the design, I do have a video on that subject. I did tilt the daisies just a little bit to make it look a little more interesting. Now I will start with the angular wash brush, and I'm going to get an area wet. I'm going to go beyond where the paint will go on both sides. I'll do section by section. It's a little bit difficult, you can see, going through trying to get into those tight spaces. And the paper is very dry, so I'm going to have to put a lot of water on there to get it softened up. I will use 2 colors for the background, the sepia and the turquoise. My object will be to try to get the sepia around the leaves and the turquoise mostly around the daisies because I think that will be a better contrast. The leaves are going to be viridian with a little touch of turquoise in it, and so I thought that that would be a better contrast to put the sepia behind the leaves. Now I switched over to the No. 8 round, and I'm going to try to get that sepia paint in all those little tight spaces. A little bit of a challenge, just takes a little bit of time. Now most likely I will get some of the brown paint in the leaf area, but I will clean that up later. I'm going to mention it now because I will probably forget. I want to make sure that when I finish the background, I let that dry thoroughly before I go on and paint anything on the daisies or the leaves. Now I can tell the paper is already drying out on me, so I'm going to just have to keep adding water. It's a bit tricky when you're putting a background in to add water and to make sure you don't get any blooms forming, but it shouldn't be as important here because I'm going to use a stencil later And as you can see on the sample on the left, you won't see any of the little imperfections because the stencil will camouflage everything. I did have to encourage it to spread a little bit. So the next section will be the turquoise color. And then I'll switch back over to the sepia again. The speed is increased just a little bit as I go around with the background. Section by section, just working around and coming around to the other side now. And then finishing the last section with another round of turquoise. I just keep switching brushes because it's easier to do that than to keep rinsing everyone out every time I need to switch a color. Now, you'll notice at the bottom of the page, the sepia is probably fairly dry, so I've got a little bit of a line there. I just take a very slightly damp brush and I'm going to work over that line, try to feather in the turquoise into that drier sepia and just kind of smooth everything out. It's a bit tricky, but it just takes some practice. Notice I am taking some of the excess water off the brush just going over very lightly to try to get everything evened out. Now that needs to dry. I felt that this section here was a little bit weak, so I'm going to do something a little risky, and that is to add some more of the turquoise. The only thing I need to be careful about is not letting any hard lines form. So I've re-wet a little bit that area, and I'm going to apply some more turquoise and then try to feather it out so you don't notice it. Now, I left one of the leaves uncorrected. I did go around and lift some of the paint to try to get the serrations nice and sharp again on those other leaves, but I did leave one area to show how I corrected and got some of that extra paint off. I took a little bit of a stiffer brush and wet the brush, but not too much water, and just tried to lift the paint out and then dab it. Lift it and dab it. I may have to re-wet the brush several times, and you'll see that the serrations will reappear again. So I'm just cleaning up those areas where the brown paint got into the leaf. Now the sepia lifts quite easily. The turquoise is a staining color, so it may not lift quite as easily, but I don't have to do that anywhere because the sepia is in the background of the leaves. Now I will paint the petals with the yellow ochre and just going right around. I don't care whether they run into each other, so I don't have to skip around with the petals. I just do some straight painting with the yellow ochre and just go around and fill in all the petals. Next, I will fill in the viridian and a little turquoise mixed together and just paint the leaves. When the leaves are finished, then both of those sections need to dry before the orange is going to be put on. Now, I wet the petal with water, and if that wasn't dry, then that would be lifting. So I want to make sure that the yellow daisies are dry before I put the orange on. So the pyrrole orange, I wet each petal first and then just dab toward the center and let the orange run out toward the outer part of the petal. Sometimes it runs a little bit too far, and I just lift some of that out. I don't want it going all the way to the edge, but maybe 3/4 of the way down, and just kind of spread out. Now I'm going to go every other petal on this because I don't want the orange to run sideways. I just want it to run forward to the outer part of the petal. Wet the paper first, then dab the orange in there. By the time I get around to the other side of the daisy, then the rest of the areas should be dry enough to apply the orange. Okay, just wrapping up the last daisy. I just felt the edges of the petals needed to have a little more color to them, so I'm just going around each edge with a little bit of the gamboge. Now for the pen work, I'm just going to outline everything with the micron pen. I chose the number 8. And you don't want to go around it real precisely. It looks better if you just go with it quickly and just go around each petal. I'm testing it on the paper because the 140-pound paper does have a bit of a tooth, and it is going to be a little rough when you go over it with the pen. Obviously, that needed to be dry before you do the pen work. Otherwise, you can really clog up your pen. And I went around the centers too. I wiped it off, and just to make sure I didn't have any paint stuck in the end of that pen. Now I'm going to build up the centers just a little bit. I took that little number 2 filbert and just putting some dabs of sepia in the centers, and I'm going to lift them. I'm going to leave it for a couple seconds and then lift some of it out. I'm not going to press too hard. Now for the stencil work, I will get that toothbrush, get that wet, not real wet, but definitely damp. Place the stencil where I think it would be most interesting, and as long as you're using good quality paper, I wouldn't worry about taping it with the artist tape. Maybe some of the cellulose type paper may come up when you take that tape off, but it's not going to hurt the arch paper. And scrub the section with the toothbrush and then dab it with a paper towel. You can see how much paint is coming up. And also, I will lift the stencil and probably dab it again just to make sure. You look at that. Isn't that fun? I will just work my way around doing the same technique, dabbing it, lifting. Isn't that cool? I just think that is so much fun. Now for the Pearlescent Paint. Fine Tech, made in Germany. I'm going to use the Olympic Gold color. Now I'm a little bit different about using the metallic paint. I like to have separate brushes that I use only for the paint because I don't want to get the metallic mica mixed up or contaminate my other colors when I'm just doing watercolor. And so I have a separate water bowl and also separate brushes that I use. Most of the brushes are smaller. You can see them in the glass bottle up at the left-hand corner. And that's just me. I just don't like to get the pearlescent paint all mixed with my other paints when I'm doing another painting. Now, I chose to spatter. I'm using that same small brush, but it's not putting a lot of big spatter, so I switched to another brush. And I'm using that piece of old mat board, but I'm not putting it down onto the paper because that spatter is not dry yet, so it would smear. So I actually didn't get the big drops that I wanted, so I'm just going ahead and adding some with the brush. So I use gold. Now I'm using the orange, the pyrrole orange, and I will also do a little bit of the black in mainly 3 corners. Now for a little bit of the lunar black, I'm going to just paint on some of the dots and also some extra dots in the center of each daisy. And that completes this project. It's a little hard for the gold to show up on the camera, but it really does look pretty in the light. So I took a very simple design and used quite a few techniques with it. I used spatter, metallic paint, stencil, glazing, a number of different techniques. So I hope that was helpful. I want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate that. And also, if you would like and subscribe, I will see you next time.